Today is Thursday, January the 8th, 2004, and this is the beginning of an interview with Leslie Edwards at the Green Hills Administration Building at 11,000 Winton Road in Green Hills, Ohio. Mr. Edwards is 79 years old, having been born on August the 9th, 1924. My name is Margaret Glostro, and I'll be the interviewer. Glory Southwind is operating the tape recorder. Mr. Edwards met Glory at a veterans tribute at Beechwood Elementary School in Greenville, Ohio. Well, shoots it right in the head. I can do paperwork later.
Okay. And so this foundation at Harvard, called Vote John Lear and Herb, it was 2 months ago, sometime in November, and they got these awards. And when they came back, I went over to Herb's house, and he showed me the plaque. He talked how excited he was, so excited about the thing. He didn't even think. He said, "How could they be giving me something like this?" He said he was looking around and see it must be somebody else they're giving this to. But they have shown so much love for one another, and they have demonstrated so much in the way of fellowship, because the things that they experienced when Herb was flying missions up into Germany and different places where it was very dangerous. He didn't know that the red tails were black. Herb didn't know. So it was only 40 years later, after he came back, that Herb found out that the red tails were black, and so he made contact with the Tuskegee Airmen in this area, and John was one of them. And then they found out that John had actually went on several missions to give him protection, him and his crews. When these guys are flying these missions in these bombers, they think in terms of the crew as being everybody's trying to protect everybody to get back home. So they got a mission to complete, but they want to come back as a group. They want everybody, and some of them might get killed. All of them might get killed, and all of them might wind up being prisoners of war, and some of them might be injured badly. But the person who is the pilot of the airplane, and Herb was the pilot of the B-17, he's thinking about, it's my responsibility to get this crew back, and if anybody can help me, see, I'm beholden to them. See. And he found from time to time, if he saw a red tail, that now he's getting some help to get back, which they brought him back every time, And he knew some of the times when the airplanes were shot up pretty bad, maybe somebody in the plane that was hurt, the red tail was going to give him protection to bring him back home. So when 40 years later, when he came down and met John at the Tuskegee Airmen meeting, and they hugged, and they got to talking, and they started checking some records and found out that there were several missions that they had been on, and he knew that John was right there bringing them back. They became real good friends. And so we was having trouble in our chapter getting somebody who could handle the treasury. And so John took over and got Herb to see how important it was that we have a strong treasury. So Herb said, "Well, I'll take it over." See? And Herb's been very effective as a treasurer with the Tuskegee Airmen chapter. But John saw we was having a problem, and he took it over, but he really needed somebody who could take it over after him. So now, and then they got real strong. They've been very, very effective at making the chapter much, much stronger. But then they go out together. They give talks together. They got children, grandchildren that meet and picnic together, and they just do have a lot of fun together. And John's girlfriend, his wife passed, and Herb's wife, they get along together, and everybody in the community, Hamilton County, they know about those two and how they get along, you know, and the newspapers have wrote them up several times. And so when this foundation at Harvard found out how this fellowship had developed, and this beautiful brotherhood had developed, you know, they call them up there and give them this award, you know. But there have been fellowships that was not designed to happen. See, the whole thing is, in Hamilton County, they were never supposed to meet and work together and come together. When they worked, both of them worked at the General Electric plant, which was the Wright plant back then, but they were segregated. Herb worked in engine tests, and where did John work? He worked where the black people work in the foundry. And when they went in the military, they were segregated. See, John went to the Tuskegee Airmen, and when Herb went to the B-17s, he knew nothing about the blacks. And even when they got over there in Italy together, when you had blacks over there flying, when they landed the airplane, they weren't around no whites at all. When Herb landed his airplane, when they went to recreation areas, when they had recreation areas for the people who was in the military was on recreation, it was totally segregated. So our society and our structure, this nation had structured a society where the separation of these two, because of race, was always supposed to be their life experience. But in spite of what this nation was trying to do to human beings, see, they found a way to come together. And when they came together, they found love, see, and care that is lasting. See. I mean, it's when you get around both of them, you just enjoy being around them because they laugh and play and joke with each other so much, and it's so much fun being around them that it's just beautiful. See. So, but the thing that we see is what this nation has tried to do with people simply because one had African ancestry. It did not intend for that person with African ancestry to ever develop a relationship with a person with European ancestry where they could say, hey, you're my brother and I care for you and we love each other. But that's the tragedy that the human beings is trying to overcome. See, this nation has a wonderful opportunity to bring human beings together as human beings. The separation of human beings has been a tragedy simply because it wasn't a tragedy because we separated. It was a tragedy because having separated, there was those who tried to exploit it, to try to make one have contempt and disrespect for the other. Now, they always had a way of having a certain amount of disrespect for a female, but there was always those who tried to exploit the differences in human beings to find a way to exploit it. See? And the exploitation of people because of physical differences, which was what race was supposed to be about, was something that people was trying to do in this nation and had worked hard at doing, in spite of the fact that we decided, oh, slavery is not acceptable. They still fell back on segregation, Jim Crow, discrimination, because there was those who wanted to exploit the separation. See? But now we see that this nation really advances itself when it doesn't exploit the differences in people. It doesn't. It advances itself when it doesn't exploit the fact that male and female is different. See? And we can see how this nation advances, and it makes human be better as human beings if we can get away from that. And that's what much of the Tuskegee Airmen experience was so awesome. The Tuskegee Airmen, their performance was at such a high level that all the people who participated in those activities, I'm saying the white pilots, the white groups who needed protection, see, they became aware, in many cases, 40 and 50 years later, that they was getting the very best of protection. See? And then those in the military, they found out, I'm talking about the higher level of command, the generals and those in the administration, the executive, they found out that the most efficient and most effective were some of the black in the Air Force. And so that caused them that when they decided to, and that's the one institution in this nation, you can't hardly think of any other institution in this nation that has stepped forward and said, we no longer accept racial superiority or racial inferiority. We are going to integrate and have everybody do whatever they can do in order to make this outfit the best outfit it can be. Now we know when they took that position in 1946, they took that position even before Truman integrated the military, because they knew what the Tuskegee Airmen had did in the way of a high performance. But when they took that position with the Air Force, they broke away from the Army, because the Army was so rigid about segregating races, see what I mean? The Navy had picked it up, the Marines had picked it up, but when the Air Force broke away from the Army, and when they broke away, they immediately took the position. We no longer recognize racial inferiority or racial superiority, and this is the way we're going to operate as a fighting unit. And they became the most efficient. And that's why when Truman said, we're going to integrate all, he was able to point to the efficiency of the Air Force because of that position they took. And then the Army got more efficient, the Navy got more efficient, the Marines got more efficient, the efficiency was that. And then they expanded over to a female, see? If she can perform, she can fly. If she can perform whatever job she proves she can do, that's her job. See? But then the military has a problem of dealing with sexual harassment. And that's one of the ugly things that our nation has had to deal with sexual harassment when it comes to females. There's always been that group that felt because she was a female and he was a male, that he had some kind of privilege where he could, perform that sexual harassment act and wouldn't have to account. And that's where we have a problem with that. Some people who always feel like when they're abused that they don't have to account. And we've had a real problem with dealing with some of that. See? But the fact that the Tuskegee Airmen's high performance gave those in high command a reason to move away from inferiority and superiority of human beings. There's a reason for having people work and perform together. And what other institution stepped forward and said they no longer recognize racial superiority? I mean, you have religious institutions. They say, well, we have problems and we want people to integrate and we want people to have diversity, but they don't say that concept of racial inferiority is something that they don't accept. See, when they went away from slavery, they still believed in racial inferiority. And when they go around talking about diversity, they still feel a concept of racial inferiority. When they talk about whatever programs they have, they don't step forward and say, we actually feel that those concepts, which was the basis of slavery, racial inferiority, is something we reject. They don't step forward and take that kind of position, but the Air Force did. And it made a more efficient military. See? But it didn't say anything about how that military was going to be used, did it?
Can you go back a little bit and tell me what you were doing before you went into the service, and about when you first went into the service, how got into the Tuskegee group, Air Force, part of the Air Force, and some of your experiences early on.
Yeah, well, Leslie Edwards was a dropout in high school. Leslie Edwards had lived in the worst part of Cincinnati, which was the ghetto plus. And Leslie Edwards' father had died when he was 5 years old. His mother, she was about 4 feet, but she was having problems trying to hold the family together. And after my father died, and the hardships that hit the family, with her trying to hold the family, which two sisters, both the sisters was older than myself, and it was so mean. And living in the West End, you had the worst type of housing, the tenement housing you lived in was so cold in the wintertime, and then it was so hot in the summertime. And when you saw your mother trying to struggle and do what she could to try to hold the family, and there were people was telling her to just put the kids in the orphan home, and there's orphan homes that will take care of them, and she wouldn't do that. And there were people in the South where my father lived, said, well, send the kids down here. And she sent us down to Memphis, but then she'd come down and get us and bring us back because she wanted us to be together. And in spite of the fact that she couldn't really. And then so when I dropped out of school, I just couldn't see where the things they was teaching me in school was going to help do what was necessary to help my mother. And I started working at different places. I worked in the downtown restaurants, which was segregated. I couldn't go around there and buy a cup of coffee or anything else. I couldn't even go in the front door. But I worked in the back washing dishes, and worked in the back washing glasses, and worked in the back doing fry cook work and short order work. And I worked in the, and then I left those places, and I finally started working on the railroad, which was extremely cold. If you're out there working on the railroad down by the river, throwing rails, and this district was extremely hard work, laying track and that kind of stuff. And then I wound up working at the packing house, Con's packing house, stripping guts, working in the gut room, where you had to strip all the filth out the guts to make chickens and hog maws and all that kind of stuff, and they're very filthy. See, when you worked at Con's packing house, it was segregated. On the side of the plant, they were doing wrapping and packing to send the product out. Those were all jobs of white people. Over on the other end, where he was killing hogs and throwing hides and everything and dealing with the guts, where all the disease and all the safety hazards, that's where all the black people worked. But the pay was better paid, and it was worked all year round, so that's where I was working when I was drafted. And so when I was drafted, that's when I went in. But after I started working at Con's packing house, I wound up getting married because I knew I had a steady income, and I wanted to pin down this girl because in the ghetto where we was living, I saw the kind of thing was getting ready to happen to her, and I said I better pin her down before these other guys get to her, and keep her from getting in trap with some of these fellows who I felt like wouldn't treat her the way I felt like she should be treated. But then I got drafted, so I had to leave and go into service. And so when I go into service with these low educational level, and they started giving me tests and everything, and they was testing people to go to officers candidate school in different places, and they were, at that time they were selecting people to go to hook up to get training for the Army Air Corps, which was going to be the basis of the Tuskegee Airmen. I didn't know nothing about the Tuskegee Airmen. I just was taking the tests, and they had failed me on a couple of tests, and they came out and talked to me. They said, "Look, you failed on a couple of tests, and we just we got people, and we want to give you the test again. And so, so they gave me the test again, and then they said, okay, well, you'll go. And that's when they decided to send me to the group that was going to be trained as aircraft and engine mechanics for the Tuskegee Airmen. But how happened they had failed me and then came back and talked to me and decided me to get a test again, I don't know what was going on there. That when I went down to the Freeman Field, Texas to be trained as an aircraft, I was so surprised to get down there, and everything in Texas is so big. In this Freeman Field, Texas, that field was so big, and the hangars on there, you never seen anything that big. I'd never seen anything. And when you go inside the hangars and you see all the airplane mock-ups and cut-ups and everything, and they let you know, now you got to learn them. And I broke out in shingles. My nervous system got so messed up, I couldn't. I said, they done sent me to the wrong place. How in the world did I get down here? And the fellows I was with, big fellows come from all different parts, California, Florida, Detroit, New York, New Jersey. Fellows come from everywhere. And they said, well, just calm down here. So we can make this. We'll work this out. Well, I didn't know a screwdriver from a wrench. I didn't know nothing about no mechanic work. And so they get back to the barracks and everything, and they're trying to settle me down. I got to go see a doctor because I broke out in shingles and everything. I go to the doctor, and they said, well, you got to settle down. And so finally they got me with people, and they talked to me about, what I need to do. And then I got with the fellows, and the fellows would, they'd be singing and having a good time, and they let me know we're going to work this thing out, And so when we started getting into the classes, and then the guys, the instructors, and everybody, but finally I felt like, well, hey, this is something that is kind of interesting, and I can get with this, and we'd stay up to 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning studying. A group of us, it may be 5 or 6 of us. We'd go into a room and we'd have our popcorn and pop and different things, and I found out that I could be ready for taking tests and everything. So I wound up being right almost the top of the class. And so when we finished our courses and went out into the field to do the work, but we were not only studying and working, we were working on airplanes part-time too as we worked. But when I wound up in the field really working, we left there and went up to Detroit. And we left Detroit and went down to Bombardment Field, Texas, which is right across from Fort Knox. And then they had me working at night on airplanes. And then they had a group of white guys coming back from China. They had been over there with those P-40s and that group over there. And they started working with us, trying to show us how to do things in the field. And I worked with those guys, and I had a real good relationship with some of those guys. Well, because I had got the training from school, and they had been actually working in the field, so it was interesting for me to see how they did things, and it was interesting for them to see how I do things. And we had a real good relationship, and I was very effective, I think, because when they decided they need a flight chief, the Air Force structured in a way where they have the mechanics and they have crew chiefs and they have the flight chief. And so because I had been working at night, they didn't know me. They just knew somebody was working at night, and I would leave documents on the desk for people to come on in the day to see what I'd done or what needed to be done and everything. And from those documents and from what I had done, they decided Leslie Evans to be the flight chief. So he sent notice to me to come on in the morning, and because they wanted somebody to be the flight chief for Flight 8. And so when I came on in the morning, I went over and sit in a chair because things was happening in the morning. Planes was taking off and people running around doing different things, and the administrative people, and this is where the big shots, the majors and the lieutenant colonels and everything was coming around and everything. And so after everybody settled down a little, all the planes was off and everything, they said, we're supposed to have somebody come in and take over Flight A as a flight chief. And somebody said, well, yeah, his name is Edward. Said, he did. What happened, And so I'm sitting over in the corner. I said, I'm Edward. And they said, well, well, stand up. And I said, well, I'm standing up now, but when I was so short, I looked still like I was sitting down. and they were so, they didn't know what to say. Everybody was silent, you know what I mean? And so I came forward and I said, well, who's all about in Flight 8, you know what I mean? And they turned over the mechanics and everything to me, that I was in the airplanes. They may know the airplanes I was supposed to be responsible for. I had 30 aircraft and engine mechanics, and 5 of them were crew chiefs. And I had 5 medium bombers that I was supposed to have ready to take off every morning. And so from that time, from then on, they found out that Leslie Edwards was one of the best flight chiefs in the Air Force. When the Air Force records came down, that we had the best safety record in the Air Force. I know I was among the tops, if not the tops, because they wouldn't tell us everything about what we were doing. But we had some officers in the command. I'm talking about the command of the 1st Air Force and the command of who was Monk Hunter. He was a segregationist to his heart. But he stepped forward and said, you know, I'm proud of the safety record that you fellas had. And I was one of the main contributors of that safety record, because we had an excellent safety record, because we had not only excellent mechanics, we had some excellent pilots. But he was a segregationist. He didn't want the pilots to ever go into officers' club with the white officers. He didn't want the white officers to ever socialize with any of the black officers. He was so strong, and our commanding officer, base commander, which was Colonel Selway, he made him the colonel because he would carry out all these segregation policies, and that's where things really blew up with the Tuskegee Airmen when they moved to Freeman Field. And these officers was coming back from Italy after they performed at the very highest level. And they hooked up with our outfit because we was getting ready to go to Japan, over the Pacific, to deal with Japan. And our officer, Colonel Selway, issued an order that the officers would not be allowed to go into the officers' club. Now these officers, they done come back from Italy, and they done performed at the highest level. They've seen they fellows die over there. They've seen a lot of them is still over there in prison, see what I mean? And now you're telling them, we're going to get ready to send you over to the Pacific to do your thing over there. But while you're here, this is Freeman Field. You cannot go into the officers' club with those white officers. And arrested them. They wind up with 162 arrests. All that's documented here. They wind up with 162 arrests. But then that's the field there, and that's the rest there. See? They wind up with 162 arrests. That's the names of the officers. That's the one that they convicted here, court-martialed him. And these are the orders that was issued, see. And that was one of the meanest things that was ever done. See?
I think that was in that Tuskegee Airmen's.
They didn't show that at all.
Oh, didn't they?
They never show that.
Oh, it was on the history channel.
No, they never show about the arrests of the 162 Tuskegee Airmen.
I've seen it somewhere.
At Freeman Field. You'll never find them. And I've got many tapes, and I've looked at every history channel show of the Tuskegee Airmen. Fact is, I'm looking at this show when they're showing it on the history channel, and seeing the 2 Tuskegee Airmen and the anchor guy talking to them, and when they get to that subject, they cut it off.
Oh, really?
They never talk about the fact that the Tuskegee Airmen was not only arrested, but not going into an officers' club, for attempting to go into an officers' club. They never talk. With the movie that they did, I got the movie, and I've talked to them. They never show that. See, they don't want to show where the Tuskegee Airmen resisted. They show where the Tuskegee Airmen had experiences with segregation and Jim Crow and discrimination, and they want to show where they sucked it up. They don't ever want to show where the Tuskegee Airmen not only resisted, but resisted effectively in a nonviolent way. They don't want that example to be something that young people can see. They didn't riot. They didn't call nobody no language or no bad language. They resisted effectively, and they set a way of resisting that all people, when they're confronted with injustice, can look at that way of resistance and say, okay, now we're going to deal with it, and we use the same pattern the Tuskegee Airmen used, and we're going to overcome this ugliness. They don't show that. And I've looked for it. And I've seen where they have opportunities to show it. And the fellow wrote a book about it, The Mutiny of Freeman Field. In fact, as I had got a picture of him, I had him sign the book for me when I got the book from him. I had him sign the book for me. And he was on the History Channel.
I know.
And they didn't even ask him about it. They didn't even ask him about his book. They didn't ask him about his book, and they didn't have him discuss anything about his book. And I'm looking right at it. You see, I know about these things. And here's here also, this is an article in Inquirer that I laid out, showing where the mutiny was won. It changed the whole concept about how we was going to deal with things. And here's this book here on Wartime. That's the one that tells the whole story. That's the one that tells the whole story and tells it accurately.
What's the title?
The Freeman Field Mutiny. And this is the fellow that wrote it here. But I wanted to show you Ted Berry's picture.
Yeah.
Because Ted Berry, he was the attorney that came down and dealt with the problem, and he was very effective at dealing with the problem. That's my command to that. And he was very effective at dealing with the problem. There, that article there, that's powerful right there. That is the man that came down there when they had the mutiny.
That might be where I heard that story. Something through Ted Berry.
I did that.
No, I mean from a story about Ted
Berry. I had all this article developed. The minister at my church, I got with him. I said, I want to develop this, and I want to take this down to the historic museum they have down at Freeman Field, because I want to show what Ted Berry done. Because they didn't have anything down there but what Ted Berry done. And I got with my minister, and I said, let's pull this here information together, all this together. And this was taken from different places and put together, and got this picture, put that in there. All that was wrote out. And then I took it down there, and I don't think they ever put it up. But they had a historical museum down at Freeman Field about what the Freeman Field had been about historically. When I went down to Freeman Field and saw the historic museum, I didn't see anything about this incident, much less about the role that Ted Berry played. So I came back and talked to my minister about putting something together. And I went back down there and took these articles down there. Plus they got a chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen in Indianapolis. And I sent them this here and I told them about getting something down there at Freeman Field that would show what the Tuskegee Airmen had experienced at Freeman Field. And I know they worked on it, but I don't know what they got down there. But
who was author of that book?
This is dynamite here too. This, and this is true. There.
What was the name of the author of the book about?
I got it all there. Come on. Lieutenant Colonel. He went through a whole lot to pull us together. There he is. Yeah.
James C. Warren.
Yeah. And he was on television, on the History Channel. They didn't let him say one word about that book. And you contact James C. Warren, and he was, and the guy talking to him about the experiences of the Tuskegee Airmen. They didn't let him say one word about that book or anything about the incident of the Freeman Field. You get the movie, The Tuskegee Airmen. I've seen the movie many times. They won't say one word about the Freeman Field incident, about these arrests, about how it was resolved. You know how it was resolved? Look, the head of NAACP, Walter White, at that time, he sent a telegram to President Roosevelt, and they had many people writing letters. That's what the Tuskegee Airmen did. They had their wives writing letters, their sisters writing letters. They had church people writing letters. They had different union heads writing letters. They had all kinds of things going to congressmen and legislatures and whatnot. But Walter White, when he sent this telegram to Roosevelt, the next day Roosevelt died. Well, yeah. And so that threw the whole issue up to Truman. So Truman and George C. Marshall, he was the head of all the military at that time, they got involved. And when they got involved, and they said, what's going on down there? And then, see, George C. Marshall was able to find out what the Tuskegee, he knew what the Tuskegee Airmen was about from the jump. See, George C. Marshall was well aware of the Tuskegee Airmen. And then when he got with Truman, and Truman was not a dummy about the military at all, because he knew what happened to blacks in World War I. And he knew what they could do and what they had did and what they had been, how things had been suppressed about the effectiveness of the black in the military. And then when they looked at it, they said, okay, all this here, you got to go. And so they said, all this is, but our commander, Colonel Selway and Monk Hunter, who was head of the 1st Air Force, said we got to court-martial some of them because some of them was violent against the military people. When they went in there, they pushed against the military police, and there was violence in it. And so, okay, well, who was violent? So they enlisted him and 2 others as being violent. They said, okay, well, court-martial them, but drop the rest of them. So when they court-martialed him and the other 2, then that's when they sent Ted Berry down to defend those. Because Thurgood Marshall was tied up out in California trying to deal with those sailors that he was messing up. He really gave him a share. But so he called, Thurgood Marshall called Ted Berry, because Ted Berry was Cincinnati. Freeman Field was about less than 50 miles from Cincinnati. So Ted Berry came down. And Ted Berry put up such a good defense that 2 of them got off scot-free, and he was fined $150. They took $50 out of his check for 3 months. And that made Selway and Monk Hunter, they were really mad. But when the deal went down, I found out years later that Truman and some of the others, they put a reprimand on Colonel Selway for even causing a problem. But I didn't find out that over 40 years later that Colonel Selway was reprimanded for even causing a problem. But see, Selway was doing what Monk Hunter wanted him to do. Don't let them, he wouldn't let them, you couldn't go into the officer club, you couldn't play tennis with them, you couldn't swim with them. All those different areas at Freeman Field. This is Freeman Field.
Yeah, that's kind of...
Yeah. So, but all this here stuff is stuff that was suppressed. And even when I went back down to Freeman Field and they set up a museum, they were suppressed. I'm saying if you see the Tuskegee Airmen, you see suppressed. And like I'm saying, when I'm talking about this, if you ask anybody, what did Ted Berry do for the Tuskegee Airmen? They don't know. You ask anybody. You ask anybody how many Tuskegee Airmen was arrested. They don't. Oh, and did you see the movie? Ask them, any of them to see the movie. When they had the movie, how many Tuskegee Airmen was arrested? They don't know about no Tuskegee Airmen being arrested. You ask somebody sometime, did you see the movie? Ask them, say, did you see the movie? See, I saw them. How many Tuskegee Airmen was arrested? It wasn't there. And I know it wasn't, because I've seen it many times. And I know this story was suppressed. And I know why it was suppressed. Because long before Martin Luther King was dealing with segregation, long ago, the Tuskegee Airmen laid out how to effectively resist. And I tell the kids when I talk to them in school, the basis for effective resistance, you've got to learn how to write. All those letters being wrote to congressmen and legislatures. No rock throwing, no name calling, effectively writing makes a difference. And when you're a child, that's when you have an opportunity to learn how to read and write. That's when you need to learn how to research. And this is your opportunity to get so fortified that when things happen that's unjust and fair to you, you can effectively get justice, not by cursing people and calling names and throwing a fit, throwing rocks, writing. Effectively writing can make a difference. But I'm saying that the whole, that part of the Tuskegee Airmen experience is something that you ask people who've seen the movie, how many Tuskegee. I'm going to, they have things at Blue Ash Airport, things at Lunken Airport, and I go to schools, and I'm supposed to go to with the Speakers Bureau. And you go to those places, and you have groups of people, and many of the people are people who are in the 70s, and you ask them, do you know about the Tuskegee? Yes, we do. What about the Tuskegee Airmen on the rest? They don't know nothing about that, because this society suppressed that. And I've been to them many times. And when I show them that part of the story, they're amazed. They don't know about that. And the whole thing about how to effectively get justice when the powers are trying to deny you respect. It's something the powers don't want you to know. They don't want you to know how to effect. If you do it in a way where you jeopardize yourself, then he can deal with you. So he don't want you to know how to effectively deal with it, where he can't mess you up. You start throwing rocks and everything, he can arrest you and he can deal with it. So,
So did your group then end up going into the Japanese?
We dropped that bomb over there.
Oh, before that.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess really then most of the Tuskegee actual involvement militarily in the war was European theater.
Yes, right. in that story there, and they got other stories of their activities that actually happened. They had many. Here is, let's see. Oh, that's it right there. That's what it was about. That was the biggie. That's what he was striking from when he was doing a lot of this stuff. That's what he was.
So they were covered quite a large territory.
Yeah, but that was the area he was striking from, and that was the area he was protecting. The bombers that was going up in those areas.
So it actually goes from Greece to Romania.
Okay, you can see it. That's all. That's all of it right there.
Up into Germany itself.
Yeah.
And then into Switzerland.
Yeah, right. And it's a part of France in there, lower part.
Yes, and Italy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Now before that, they had been down into North Africa, you know, and they did a very effective job, because when they invaded, when the Europeans and Americans especially invaded down at the scenario in Sardinia in those areas, the Germans tried to push them back, you know, and the German tanks, that Tiger tank, it was mean and dominating. And the only way you could deal with that Tiger tank, you had to strike it from above with dive bombing or something like that. See? Because other than that, the guys on the Tiger tank was too much. But and this is where the Tuskegee Airmen was very effective at giving the guys cover from the sky. See? But then the Tuskegee Airmen had to fight off the German fighter planes.
Yeah.
See, they not had to only protect the guys on the ground, but they had to fight off the German fighter planes. And then they was flying an inferior aircraft at that time. The Tuskegee Airmen was flying the P-40 at that time. See? But see, the P-40 was a good plane, but it couldn't go up to certain altitudes, like you get past 12,000 feet, and it wasn't no good. But by them trying to cover people on the ground, they could be effective because they stay down low, and that would cause the German fighters, who was up maybe at 20,000 feet, to have to come down. And then when they come down, that gives the Tuskegee Airmen a chance to fight them off. And they kill a lot of German fighter pilots and all like that. It was a very, very, very effective. And the guys on the ground and the military people at high command, the thing the Tuskegee Airmen did, helping the guys land in Italy, is really what made the Tuskegee Airmen have we got a lot of respect for that. But see, the Tuskegee Airmen were noted for protecting the bombers. But before they started protecting the bombers, they had really established themselves as a qualified fighter group, using the P-40. They really changed them from the P-40 and gave the P-51 the best airplane in the military after that. And then when the Tuskegee Airmen got the P-51, they knew they were the best in the world. They felt like they were the best in the world because they had the best fighter aircraft that was ever made.
This is amazing.
But then, when you're up against the Germans had an awesome military force, and the German mind, when it comes to how to handle a tank division, the German mind, when it comes to handle anything in the military, is awesome. And you're going to give up some lives. You ain't walking away, you're going to pay a price. And so I'm saying the Tuskegee Airmen, they went down sometime because they was up against some people that, it ain't like you flying over Iraq that people don't know how to do. But them Germans, they knew how to take care of that. I don't care whether they're fighting the Russians or anybody. The Germans are the military power, us. And they had a lot of field generals that knew how to take lives. And they had some equipment. German fighter planes, good planes. The Germans had some stuff. I'm telling you, Hitler had mismanaged things. You know, and took on so much. He couldn't be. The way the Germans engineers could develop equipment, mind-boggling. And then they had guys out in the field who know how to use that equipment. But Hitler just stretched out things too far. And the Germans had some things that was being developed. They couldn't get it all together because they were stretched out so far. The Germans they were developing that jet 262. And that jet fighter 262, that thing can do 700 miles an hour. Well, the best of our planes may do 500 miles. When you got 200 miles an hour, you can get on somebody. And when it comes to bombers and everything like that, the MA-262, he could put them in there. He couldn't get them up there fast enough, see. And then the guys, they had killed off so many of the good German pilots, see, that some of the guys flying the 262 wasn't their best pilots. And that's yeah. But so when they couldn't. But when the Tuskegee Airmen but the Germans, when they did capture, and they captured over 32 Tuskegee Airmen, and the Tuskegee Airmen, when they would be captured, and they bring them back to the, interview them, and they knew their names.
Oh, really?
The Germans knew the name of every Tuskegee Airman. When they capture them and they take them back to him, and we know all of you. Every one. And the Tuskegee Airmen found out when they would put them in prison, they would give them the same respect as any other officer.
I was wondering about that.
And the Tuskegee Airmen, they said the Germans, when they found them to be in charge, they got the same respect as any other officer. And Germans come here. Him. He was trying to buy a house here in Cincinnati, and he was having problems because of what it was like back then. Segregated house. And he met a German, a fellow from, he was a German, but he had left Germany. He got to be a citizen of the United States. And he couldn't understand John saying he was a military vet and he couldn't buy a piece of property because, and the German couldn't understand that.
Yeah.
He said, you're a vet, and you can't buy a piece of property because you're black. And John tell you, in Germany, he couldn't understand that. So, but a lot of times, see what I do, I go out to these guys' houses and sit down and talk to them. I've been out to John's house, Herb's house, and he was my commanding officer. I was out to his house, and I sit down and talk to him. That was my best friend when I was in service. But over there, you see, and them guys, when you get in their house and you sit down with them and talk to them about the experiences they had and whatnot, this is the artist that drew all these pictures. All these pictures that we drew, he drew them. He lives here in Hampton County too. He's an excellent artist. You can see the kind of work he do. But my grandson bought every picture he drew, got in his house, in the basement, in the living room, and third floor, and pictures all over the house.
Looking at this mural.
Yeah, in St. Louis, in the airport, when you go to the airport in St. Louis, they got that mural all over, and it's big, and it's fantastic the way they done it, you know. And I should have brought the whole thing and laid it out where you could actually see how it's mind-boggling. Now they did another mural out in California. They got another one they're doing out in California. It's supposed to be pretty big too.
Now, were you, what years were you actually in the service?
That's about 43, maybe 46, 40 something like that.
Did you benefit from your skills? Obviously, you have got.
When they got you out of service, they tell you, you know, hey, that don't mean nothing. I went out to Lincoln Airport to take the test to be a civilian mechanic, and I had been a flight chief, and I talked to the guy, you know, about taking the test so I could. He said, "You can't work on no planes here. You can't touch none of this stuff." And them little planes out there look like a toy to me. They look like little toys. And he said, "Now, you know, he said, you can't touch none of this stuff." And I've had pilots to go and put in applications, and the people let them know that pilot training, they don't mean nothing. One guy, he left his magazine, and he came back to get his magazine, and he saw where they had thrown his application into the trash can. This guy, he's in New York. He tried to put an application in to be a pilot for Eastern Airlines. But no, they make you know that you know that experience you had on the other. Then when I went back to Collins Packing House, before I went back to Collins Packing House, I was on furlough, and I told him, I said, "Look, I'm on furlough, and I know I'm gonna get discharged, and I got a wife and 2 kids now." I said, "I need a job, so I'm going to get understanding because I need them." "Oh, come on back, you." When I came back, don't call us, we'll call you. And when I went home, I mean, I done got out of service now, about a month later. And I told them ahead of time, you know, what my situation was. And then when I came back, you know, don't call us, we'll call you. And so I get a job working temporary down at the post office. You know, they don't do that no more, but they used to let people work down at the post office temporary. And after I worked down there and I was over, then I met one of the guys that worked at Collins Packing House. I was in the movie house back getting popcorn. He said, "Look, say, I didn't know you was out." I said, "Yeah, I've been out a few weeks." He said, "How come you haven't come back?" They said they would call me, but they haven't called me, so I've been down to the post office. He said, "Look, they ain't never gonna call you. Say, we're gonna try to work this out different. Say, you call the head union man, tell him what you did, and ask him what you should do." So I called the head union man, and he gave me a telephone. The union man said, "Look, you go on there up here, get your work clothes together, and you come out there Monday morning with your work clothes." And so I got work clothes together, and I came out to contract house. And the union man, he was out there waiting. And so when I come back and we go into the personnel office, I have my work clothes and everything, and the union man's there with me. And the head of the personnel told me, "You stay out there." Him and the union man went in the back, and it was so much, they got so loud, I thought they was back there fighting. That thing almost broke loose back there. And then, okay, he said, "You go on back, come back to go to work." They sent me back on the beef line, where they dumped all the guts. Where they dump all the guts out of the cattle. And then they had a gut buggy. And I'd take that gut buggy and take it down to the tanks where they dump it down in the tanks and make fertilizer out of it. And that was my job. Now, you know, and so I would take this here gut buggy, which is full of guts, and they'd have it so full of guts you couldn't hardly see me behind it. See? And take it down there and dump it down there to the thing where they make fertilizer out of it, and then bring the gut buggy back, change gut buckets. That was my job. Now, you know, in a packing house, they have the area where they process meats and where they process fresh meats, cut up the animals and whatnot, you know. Then they process cooked meats, ham, sausage, bologna and whatnot. And then they wrap and pack, you know, and then they prepare it to be shipped out. All those jobs over there, hey, when I'm in there, I'm seeing people in there working that can't hardly speak English. They got people in there that came back from Europe that couldn't hardly speak English, and men and women. And they wouldn't hire a black woman there to do nothing. She couldn't do nothing. She couldn't rap and back, couldn't do nothing. And all where I was working, and all where the blacks were working, was the most dangerous, where the most germs, where the most safety situations we occurred. And that was where we would work. And then, so that's the experience that I had, you know, with Tom's packing house.
Did you finish? Did you retire from the packing?
No. I see, I went back to school after I wound up getting a bachelor's degree, and then I wound up becoming a meat inspector.
Oh, did you? Good.
Yeah. And then I became a meat inspector supervisor, and some of the meat inspection efforts and things I was doing, you know, I've got awards for doing some of that kind of stuff, you know, getting convictions for people who were adulterating meat and all that kind of stuff, you know. Yeah. That's a guy right there, man of ministry. He worked with me. See, they talk about mad cow disease. This guy, he would deal with that kind of stuff. He's a veterinarian. He had his pictures. He saw me speaking at a certain place, and we had our pictures taken here. But see, when you're working in meat inspection, see,